What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little different. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about how I was a medical school student for 3.5 years and left the program. Now I've been outside of medicine for about 4 years almost. So dawn on me, I've spent almost as much time outside of medicine since I left as I have in it. And I want to talk about some of the reasons why I left and some of the lessons that I've learned now that I've had some time to kind of dwell on things over the last few years. So, believe it or not, this is actually a picture of me from 8 years ago now. Hard to believe, but right when I was starting medical school. Well, a little less than 8 years, but close to that. But yeah, so most of my channel is pretty much more music and sports related. I don't really talk about things like this too often, but what I want to kind of talk about this story because I think that there's a lot of lessons that I learned that I think can help people in terms of the job that they're in and taking the perspective out of it. So the way I want to go through this is I want to talk about kind of just my background for the first third of this video, kind of talk about the things I went through, etc. Talk about then the reasons why if you're looking into medicine, things that you have to consider, the top 3 things, in my opinion, that you would consider. And then I'm going to talk about some of the things I learned afterwards and 3 perspectives that I encourage you to have depending on what type of job you're in. Kind of to start chronologically about myself a little bit. So when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a doctor. I always felt that that was the best way that I could help people because I've always kind of been service oriented and I want to try to do what I can to help people and leave an impact for people. So I always was, when I was young, was always stuck on the idea that the best way to do this is as a doctor because the doctor treating patients, saving lives, most impact on most people. But growing up in my life, I did not have any medical professionals in my immediate family or anything like that. So I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into at all. I also kind of grown up very math and science oriented. I really loved those subjects. Did very well in chemistry, and in college I majored in chemical engineering and actually did pretty well because I really enjoyed that. So really enjoyed that linear kind of black and white thinking that comes with some of the engineering sciences, things like that. And I kind of expected that medicine would be very much the same way. And at the time, for some reason, thought chemical engineering would be really good preparation for medicine, but I didn't necessarily understand that very well. So going into medicine, I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into. I really only took the prerequisite classes before entering the program. So when I got into school, I really struggled a lot. I basically kind of, honestly, my first year in school, I was borderline passing everything, and I was at the point where I failed so many exams that the school recommended that I retake the first year. And this all happened to me within the first 3.5 months of being in med school. And that was a huge shock to my system and confidence at the time. So I chose to fight through it. I took undergrad classes for a year after I already completed my degree just to boost up on some of the anatomy, physiology things that I didn't have. So I went back into the first year of med school the next year with a better sense of knowledge and preparation for anatomy, which I actually really enjoy. But as I kind of got through medicine and made it through that first year and into that second year, I kind of started to realize that there's other aspects of medicine too that I didn't consider because of my background knowledge that really made it difficult for me. One of which, in terms of the process of thinking, as I kind of talked about earlier, I'm a very math science person, very much black and white. I like things to kind of follow a very logical sequence that I can predict. And that medicine is not like that at all. So medicine, you really have, the way you're tested is you've got 5 questions in a multiple choice answer that to pick from, and 4 of them are technically correct, but you're looking for the most correct. And you have to base that off a whole theory of, well, not theory, but just an entire database of knowledge that you have to learn and memorize and then remember what guidance goes according to which triage and etc., things like that. So you're really cramming in a lot of memory, and it's more so, I think, medicine is less based on a process of uh, X equals Y equals Z, as more so just memorizing a lot of different things and trying to plug it in. That was, at least from my experience, what I got from it. So when I got to the way my school was organized is the first year was a lot of the basic sciences. We did anatomy, we did normal physiology, but then we got into more of the clinical sciences in the second year. So the pathology, the pharmacology, things like that. And that was where I really started to struggle, because I really struggled to connect the dots between what something is versus how do you treat something, and then what such and such regulation says of how to treat something. And that was a very difficult challenge for me, and didn't expect to go into that. I was kind of expecting more in my head, from what I was thought I would be getting into before I started med school, more PhD type research, etc. So just to kind of summarize things in depth, I did not cope with things very well in my second year dealing with this. So in my second year, had a lot of personal issues. I don't really want to go into that in this video, but it significantly impacted my ability to focus and perform. And I chose to go about it the wrong way. I chose the method of isolation as opposed to the method of really reaching out for help. And it was, I put myself through a lot of situations in my second year that made things very difficult for me, but I kept pushing through in spite of the fact that I did not enjoy the curriculum that I was realizing that I would be focusing more on in medicine than I expected, because I kept telling myself that if I just make it through this second year, the third year will be significantly better, because I'll get to see patients and get to help people like I expected to. And by the way, in terms of grades, I was on the verge of failing out second year throughout the entire year. I had to repeat multiple exams, ranked in the bottom 10% of my class. It was just very devastating to my confidence and my morale at the time. It was honestly probably one of the lowest periods of my life that year. So by some miracle, I did pass the boards, though, for middle of second year into third year. But third year, I continued to have problems, because I realized that this is more clinical processing than I expected, and I really didn't enjoy that stuff. The other thing I realized in clinicals is that doctors are not necessarily you're not getting that patient interaction like I would have expected. You're seeing a patient for about 10, 15 minutes at a time, and I personally felt that you're asking them a series of questions to figure out what's going on, and your team is the people that's actually spending the time with the patients and talking to them, is my opinion, like the nurses, different therapists, etc. So I felt that with all these patients, I really wasn't actually getting the fulfillment of the personal interaction that I wanted with them. So that was very challenging to me as well, and just not fulfilling. So my grades were continuing to do poorly in third year. Problems really didn't go away from second year. What was a big wake-up call for me in third year, we have to take a physical exam where we have standardized patients and they're actors, and you basically have to perform the task of interviewing them, examining them, etc. There were a lot of ideas that passed through my head that morning that I could go the route of intentionally failing this exam, and if I fail this exam, then I would be dismissed from school, and I wouldn't have to look like I quit or gave up on this thing because I just let the system fail me. And I stepped back and thought about it that night. And by the way, I did not do that. I chose to try to push through that thought process, and I chose to try to do the best I can, even though there was definitely a lot of temptations. And I put some thought into it, and I said, if that's my mentality, if I want to be at the point where I'm failing something so somebody else can make a decision for me, then that's truly being a quitter more than actually making the strong choice to decide if something is not for you. And this had honestly been something I'd been contemplating for a while, because as I discussed, I was struggling out the gate. I didn't really enjoy this as much. And I kind of realized that there were some other fields in science and math that I did really enjoy. So ultimately, my faith is very important to me. So I spent a lot of time praying about this and kind of seeing if I can get some guidance from God about how I can pursue the next step forward. And without really getting into details about this too, because it's another very personal event, the following day there was, to me, that kind of sign that essentially made up my mind that, you know, this, I need to move on from this and just pursue a different career. Very tough decision for me, but ultimately I think it was the right one. And as I've kind of gone through this over the last 4 years, I've kind of realized that this was the right decision for me. And I'm going to kind of talk about this in a sec. But first, real quick, 3 things that I would really look into before you go into medicine from this. I took a little longer on my personal story than I thought I would, but basically, the 3 things I would look at is, 1, is medicine going to be something that you would enjoy the work of if you were a doctor? So as I talked about, you really have to know what you're getting into before you get into it. And if you're going to be a doctor, you have to understand that you're going to work long hours. Residents are going to have to work 80 hours a week and possibly more. I was actually just talking to a friend in med school who said that in some states, they don't waive the 80-hour requirement. So as a result, some of their residents are working 120 hours a week, which, doing the quick math in my head, is about 18 hours a day. So that's insane. So you have to be ready for the fact that 4 to 8 and potentially even 10 years of your life are going to be based around not only studying nonstop and trying to prepare for boards, but then when you get into residency, in those latter half of that period of time, you're going to be working insane hours. So you're really putting your life on hold to prepare for this. So you really have to enjoy it if you're going to go through that commitment. And that kind of leads me to my second point. Are you willing to make the sacrifices necessary to be a doctor? So as I mentioned, there's a lot of factors that go into that. You've got to understand the long hours. You've got to understand that you're going to be away from your family. You're going to potentially be separated from your spouse or your children. Things like that can be very difficult. And you want to make sure that you are in a position, especially with your mental health and with your other factors going on in your life, that you could handle the stress that comes with being a doctor, because you have to make sure that you're 100% and you're good to go so that you can give it your all to the patients and take care of them to the care that they deserve. And then my number 3 point that I want to bring up is that, do you have other career options potentially that could satisfy the values of what you're looking for in a job, and how you can contribute to society? And if you do, then you might want to potentially think about other options. Some people are in a situation where they can't really decide what they want to do, or they've got a financial situation that kind of forces them into medicine, which I'm actually going to get into a set with my own personal situation. But some people really love medicine and they feel that they don't really have a lot of other options in medicine for whatever reason that may be. But other people, very talented and can actually pursue a lot of different fields as well. So keep in mind of what your options are and what your values are in terms of what you're looking for in a job before you really decide if you want to go into medicine. So this leads me back to myself real quick in terms of what I've done afterwards and some of the lessons I've learned. I want to give you 3 takeaways from that as well. So another thing I don't really talk about myself is that I'm actually in the military. So I went through the Health Professions Scholarship Program, which basically they pay for med school and you owe service in place of student loans. So because I did med school through that program, I had to owe service time to make up for the fact that I did 3 years of med school basically without finishing the degree. So currently I'm in the process of paying off the military time, which I went to, I was in the military program in undergrad. So I'm very familiar with that process and didn't have an issue serving as opposed to paying off all the loan money. That was not an option for me. So I've been in the military since then. And one of the biggest things that I've learned is that there are, you have to understand, there's things that I do really enjoy about my job, and that there are things that I really like and I'm happy that I've moved on for. But in terms of challenges and things that can be stressful in terms of your job, now versus what I had in the past when I was in the medical field is you still are dealing with a lot of different types of problems, and things are not necessarily always 100% perfect as we picture our head. I mentioned earlier how I kept telling myself in med school, if I just keep getting through the second year and then make it to third year, things will be 100% better. Or if I get through third year and then get to residency, things will be 100% better. That's a very dangerous mentality to have if you're not realistically considering the challenges that lie ahead. And I admit I am not great at doing that myself, but I will say that I've learned a lot about through these jobs in comparison to medicine, that there are better ways that you can cope with this now that I'm older and better understanding of it. So basically, I feel that I made the right choice by getting out because it allowed in my job I'm doing now, I have a little more time. I'm still very busy, but I still have a lot of time to pursue hobbies and keep my personal life together. So I think if I had pursued medicine around now, I would have been better able to cope with those things than I did when I was pursuing it in my young 20s. But they can't really necessarily go back and change the past. I think that if I just kept plowing through in the situation I was in med school, it wouldn't have worked out for me. So I want to use the last few minutes of this video to talk about the 3 things that I've learned from this situation 4 years after leaving med school. Number 1 is that regardless of, these apply to whatever kind of job you're in. Number 1 is understand that there's going to be challenges in every profession that are going to be stressful and are going to push you. I think as I mentioned earlier, a very dangerous mentality to have is that there will be no challenges and things will be 100% perfect. You want to be in a position, you have to understand that you will be challenged, and you also have to acknowledge the fact that if you are getting challenged, it's sharpening you and making you better. So really focus on why you're experiencing these challenges. Is it because of a situation that you don't enjoy it and it's just not your passion, or are you being challenged in a way to pursue your passion? So really focus on those things I'd encourage you to do. And then number 2, focus on your attitude, because that is the thing that you can control the most in the situation that you're in. So I just used myself as an example again. So would I want to pursue potentially other things if I had the freedom to do that and I wasn't pegged to paying off the scholarship? Possibly. But I also understand the fact that I can't control that. I chose to do service as opposed to paying off debt, and I have to try to make things work to the ability of what I can control. So so in my situation with med school, I was able to get out because I didn't have that debt lingering over my head. A lot of students in my situation, that they were in the late third year, they wouldn't have made that decision to get out because they would have had potentially $150,000 or more, up to $200,000 in student loans that they would have to pay off during that. I didn't have that crux, so I was able to make the decision to push through it. And then the third thing but before I get to the third thing real quick, you can control your attitude though. And that is one of the biggest things that you can do as a steward in whatever profession you're in, is try to be the positive in all situations and try to reflect that upon others, because you can make a huge difference just with your attitude. And the third thing, regardless of whatever profession that you're in, make sure that you find time to pursue your personal hobbies and your family. Because as I mentioned earlier, one of the mistakes I made when I was going through med school is that I chose the path of isolation and trying to push through it by myself. And I sacrificed in the wrong areas. I didn't make times for the hobbies that I enjoy or connecting with others. And that is, if you get into that pitfall, it leads to dangerous consequences. So make sure that you're taking time to do the things that you like. So for me, I like making these YouTube channels. I like doing artistic things like music, painting. I actually made this painting right here in the middle. So there's things that I enjoy doing that I'm able to, I prioritize making time for that in addition to work. And making sure that you have the time with your families and your loved ones too. You want to make sure that you're making the time for that in whatever job that you're in, because that will give you some crucial recharge time to really help you be successful in your job and do the best you can with the profession that you're in. So those are my key takeaways from my experience with med school. Um, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear anybody's story if they're in a similar situation or if they have experience in medicine, thinking about med school, etc. I really want to try to help people out with my story and some of my lessons that I've learned uh, through this situation. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.